Hello. Welcome back to our workplace innovation series. My name is Andrew Fair. I'm co-founder and CEO of Density. We count people in buildings. But today I'm really excited to talk to Liis from TransferWise. My first question, actually, I have three questions. One, is that a background? Uh, Two, are you still called TransferWise? And three, are your offices open and in use?
Okay, I will try to remember all of it. The first and most important, this is not a background, this is actual space in our Tallinn office. Then the second question was if we are still TransferWise. Actually, we just lately changed our name to Wise because right now already we are doing more than just transferring money. And just to be open to all the new functions, we now are called Wise. And your third question was if our offices are open. Yes, our offices are partially open. We have 16 different locations around the world, and we are following the government restrictions. So, but we're trying to
Dependent on the region.
yeah.
So for the folks who are unfamiliar with maybe TransferWise and now Wise, what does Wise do and what's your role there?
Okay, so we're a fintech company, and our main thing has been so far for the past 10 years to help people transfer money between different currencies without hidden bank fees. Now already we also have a plastic card, and our users can receive salary and pensions to Wise account. So this is very suitable for people who want to relocate to different countries or have families living elsewhere.
And what's your role at Wise?
Yes, that's right.
That's okay. I promise to only ask one question at a time. I sometimes sort of get like super distracted by the three or four or five
Yeah,
questions
my
asked. So
memory isn't good.
no worries.
But yeah, but what I do is I manage workplace projects. So basically, I help build offices from start to finish. And I have been here in Wise for 2 years now.
Cool. So it's always helpful if we start with like a little bit of a context on scale. So how many employees do you have, and approximately how many offices are you managing?
Yes. So our current headcount globally is 2,326 Wisers.
That's the most
Very,
specific answer I've ever gotten to that question. So
I
that's
have
great.
learned it by heart. Just and the rest of the question was
And how many offices are you operating?
yes. So we are operating six talent hubs in New York, Tampa, London, Tallinn, Budapest, and Singapore, and then 10 smaller regulatory offices.
So I think a lot of folks, we've had kind of U.S. centric guests before, where a lot of their offices are inside the U.S. and they certainly have some spaces in EMEA or in APAC, but um, TransferWise and now Wise seems to have a pretty distributed kind of office structure internationally. And so I'm curious, what do utilization rates look like in spaces that are actually fully open? Like which regions of the world have you seen actually fully reopen? And then which regions are mostly still closed down?
We're not fully open anywhere. So everywhere we have some kind of restrictions. And these things also change based on what the current situation in countries is. But right now, Singapore is doing the best.
Hmm.
And Singapore has our highest occupancy rates. So last month, from the legal capacity, 21% was utilized.
21% of legal capacity.
Yeah.
And are you measuring that in badge swipes, or are you measuring like what is sort of the method by which is it observation? Is it security check-ins? What's your method?
We are using Wi-Fi data at the moment.
Gotcha. Um, so, so Singapore is back. When, we've heard sort of graduated steps back towards fully online. And so one of my questions is like, you're at 20% now. Are you at 20% because you have a maximum of 20 or 21%? Or is that just simply the appetite for folks to return?
This is the appetite. So if everyone went in who were allowed to, then we would have like a 50%. So not even half of the people
58%.
who would
Gotcha.
be able to go.
Gotcha. What do you think let's say you turn up the dial and places like Singapore become fully online. There is no maximum safe capacity. You've just reopened the offices in full. What do you think the reality is as folks come back? I mean, um, maybe my first question really is, what percentage of your employees were remote before the pandemic?
Um, it's hard to say like that because a lot of people were also like on holidays or on sick leave, but our occupancy rates were around 75 to 80%.
But is it fair to say that the vast majority of the work that Wise does is in person inside offices?
Um, I wouldn't say so. I would say that we are able to work from wherever we want to. Right now, it's more based on how people want to work.
I see. I see. But I thought Wise had a new program around like, we're going to support 90 days, up to 90 days a year where you can work remotely. So do you have sort of a remote support, sort of into perpetuity for anyone, or do you have sort of limits on how often you can be out of office?
You have heard very right. So we do have 90 days remote working, and this is per 1 year. So you can choose basically any location in the world and go and work from there.
Gotcha. So I guess the heart of my question is like, you reopen these offices, spaces like Singapore. What do you think the difference is going to be in attendance pre-pandemic to post-pandemic fully vaccinated? Will there be a difference, or are you going to go back to what you think is some semblance of what it looked like prior to COVID?
That's a very good guessing game. But to understand it a little bit better, then at the end of last year, we carried out surveys in different locations to understand the appetite to go back to the office. And I would say that in all of the locations, the average would be people wanting to go to the office 2 to 3 days per week and to work the rest of the days from home. So looking at like a weekly average, then it would be 50%.
Gotcha. I mean, does that mean that you're going to be consolidating space? Like, what's your total square footage across your entire portfolio, approximately?
We have 260,000 square foot, so quite a lot.
Yeah.
But at this point, we are not planning to downsize because we are still growing very fast and we have to support that growth even if our offices might seem a little bit too big at the moment, then in the future they definitely are not going to be.
Yeah, we've heard this from a variety of sort of fast growing or rapid growing tech companies that, best decision is likely to not consolidate space in advance of, additional headcount growth. By the way, if you have questions, to everybody who's attending, if you have questions, please toss them in the Q&A. I can also see them in the chat. And there's actually a good question about how you think about tracking the 90 days. So you've got offices you said you've got 6 different offices, is that right? Or 16?
At 16.
Okay, you've got 16 different offices. You've got 2,000 employees. You've multi-region, multi-time zone. Um, uh, how are you tracking remote work? The question is sort of how are you tracking the 90 days? Is it the honor system, or is it something that you have some methodology for?
Mm-hmm. Actually, it's a little bit difficult for me to answer because we have a special team for it in our HR team. You basically have to register yourself if you want to go and work remotely, and all of those remote workers are tracked. I am not entirely sure how though.
Gotcha. So you have a rather substantial change coming. What percentage of your seats were assigned pre-pandemic, 1-to-1 ratio? And then what percentage do you think will be unassigned post-pandemic?
So pre-pandemic, it was pretty much 1-to-1. But because of our rapid growth, it didn't work very well. But now, post-pandemic, we are thinking that we are going to activity-based workspace, and no one will have their own assigned seat. So there will still be like neighborhoods and areas within the office, but no like name tagged desks.
Gotcha. And so you're essentially going from 100% assigned to 100% unassigned for 2,000 employees across 16 countries. How are you managing the change? Is there feels like there's a lot of change management that goes into that type of process. And we've heard this from actually a number of organizations who are making this really substantive cultural change. Just curious how you're thinking about rolling that kind of thing out.
I hope it's going to be a little bit easier to implement because of the pandemic and because so many people are already working from home. But I would say it's not going to be very easy. For example, in Tallinn, we just sent the news out yesterday that this is something that we want to go for. And of course, there are people who are entirely not happy with it. There are people
Yeah.
who are fine with it, but the loudest ones are the ones that are not happy. And definitely it requires more explanation and more change management from our side to make everyone feel welcome at the office and make them feel that they can do their best work here.
Yeah. So real estate and like offices feel like the definition of what is the workplace has changed. You know, the workplace is now our home. The workplace is maybe the temporary WeWork that we use while we're traveling to a particular city. Um, it's both a hub and it's all the spokes. Um, are, Very practically speaking, like, are you supporting people's internet while they're working from home? Are you offsetting some of their cost at home since they've got dedicated space to do work? Are you thinking about sort of the ergonomics of working from home? Do you have a daycare policy? I'm just sort of curious how you've incorporated or not incorporated how Wise has thought about sort of like people's personal lives being so overlapping with their working lives.
Mm. So we have a working from home kit. So basically, there is amount assigned for each of the Wisers that they can use to make their home office better. But speaking of the rest, this is not covered, and this is also one of the reasons why offices are open. If you don't actually have a home environment where you can work from, then the offices are open and you can go to the office to do your best work.
Gotcha. There was one question about just sort of personal tax issues. You know, if you can work 90 days anywhere in the world, how do you deal with taxes? And this is a good question because I was, you know, in the U.S., if you go to like Texas, it's a very different state income tax than if you're in California. And so I'm curious if, and I'm not sure if the right team to ask would be the legal team, but I'm curious if you've run into some of these issues and how you're mitigating.
Yes, I would say that this is very much wiser mobility type of question that I'm not very familiar with.
Sure,
So unfortunately, I really don't know about the.
sure. But it sounds like the intent is really to provide flexibility to teams.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so talk to me maybe a little bit about how you're thinking about the making offices safe. Like, what are the practical things that you're doing to make sure that these spaces are safe?
Yes, well, of course, we are following the government restrictions. Whatever government says, we try to implement in our offices as well. But we have sanitizers in all of the offices. We have hired extra cleaning, so the cleanings would happen more often. Then we have restrictions in common areas and meeting rooms, so there are limitations about how many people can be in the same room. And we are in some offices where possible also implementing the one-way system.
And what is the one-way system?
So, for example, if there is an opportunity to walk around always one way so that people wouldn't come face to face, then we are trying to make office work that way.
What about so one of the things that we've heard from organizations is that like some kind of adhere just to local policy, and then others, and then they sort of layer on top of that their own corporate policy. So, do you have a masks mandate? Do you have a masks in motion mandate? or are you just following local ordinances, given that you operate in so many different countries, or at least so many different um, regions? How are you thinking about standardization across those?
Yes, we are trying to keep it somewhat similar in all of the offices. Of course, depending on what is required and what feels needed in specific locations. But we don't force visors to wear masks while they're at the office, but we encourage it.
Have you had any incidents as a result of sort of policy? I guess the thing that I'm curious about, and maybe that's not, maybe that's an HR, maybe I'm wandering into HR land that we can't talk about. Maybe a better question is, do you find that decisions on wearing masks are political or are have to do with sort of the effect of COVID regionally? Like Singapore, for instance, has, culturally, there are a lot more masks. So I'm just sort of curious, is it a cultural thing, or do you find that it's a political thing, or is it the severity of the pandemic in one region or another?
I think it's about the severity of a pandemic in different regions, because I think it's a reasonable measurement to take. But also at the office, we don't force anyone to do things that they don't want to do.
Sure. Um, so unassigned seats, there's a really good question that sort of has to do with what are shared amenities, meaning like uh, in these unassigned seats, are you going to be equipping it with a shared monitor and a shared keyboard and mouse, or do people need to bring that with them, or are they expected to work off laptops?
Yes, so for that we had a little poll as well to understand the ratio between visors who need two monitors, who need one monitor, who don't need monitors at all. And based on that, we are preparing areas in the office. Some of the areas have two monitors, some have one, and some areas don't have any monitors, as well as each of the visors have their own laptop and the gear that comes with it, keyboards, mouses, and I don't know the technical stuff. Basically, yeah, but what will the visors have? They will have a desk, a monitor if they want to, the cables to connect their laptop to it,
Sure.
a chair, of course, but a lot of it is just stuff that you can take with yourself and work from anywhere,
Yeah, it
basically.
makes sense. So the stuff that you touch is likely stuff that you're going to bring with you. The stuff that you don't touch, like a monitor,
Yeah.
typically, although oftentimes mine has smudges on it. Um, Makes sense. How often are you cleaning? These unassigned desks, I know that people are moving to unassigned, but do you really expect folks to have like multiple people using the same desk in a single day? Or or will it really be like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to use a desk, I'm going to use it for the full day, and then it's really unassigned thereafter for the next person?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have cleaners. I'm not sure about other locations, but I know in Tallinn office cleaners are in the building 24/7.
Hmm.
But also on the desks, already now we have sanitizing wipes. So the good thing to do is when you leave your desk, then you clean it up yourself with a wipe, everything you have touched, and then leave the space open for another person.
This is this is sort of a question that we've been asking of guests since April of 2020, having to do with actual safety, policy process methodology, and the perception of safety. So how are you thinking about like communication? How are you thinking about providing confidence to come back to the office? And this ties in with a question that someone's asking about how do you get folks who are maybe less excited about no longer having a desk, or less excited about coming into a shared space during or shortly after a pandemic? How do you entice folks to come back, and how do you ensure that they have or feel safe, not just that they are?
Yeah, so since it all started, we have been doing a lot of comms. And this I have the workplace community team to thank for. Basically, every week they send out an update, what has changed at the office, what has changed in the country. and all different locations do it for their own team. So everyone is all the time updated, and they know what kind of safety measurements we take at the offices. So I would say that our advisors are pretty well informed so far. And also when we are working on new projects, then we let them constantly know about what we do to reduce those issues or concerns that they might have about returning to the office.
I mean, by and large, are people excited to come back to the office?
Oh, I would say it's a 50-50. Some people are very comfortable at home, and some people find it very difficult to work from home, like me today. So yeah, 50-50.
Gotcha. What are some of the programs that Wise is implementing that you feel are kind of unique um, to your culture or company? Or do you feel that most of these things are relatively kind of blocking and tackling safety and return to office? I know that you had talked about a couple programs that you were implementing that you wanted to bring up.
Yes, so one of them is hybrid working. So if this all is over, we are not forcing Wisers back to the office. They can still choose where they want to work from. We also already covered the remote working from another country. They can continue working from home as much as they want to, or they can use the office as much as they want to. And we are also changing the offices a little bit. As also mentioned before, there was 1-to-1 ratio to desks. Now we are trying to understand a little bit better what kind of activities Wisers do throughout the day,
Sure.
and provide special areas assigned for those activities, so they could do what they want and they have to do during their workday.
So I always love to sort of like uh, towards the end, kind of have a conversation about like what you would imagine the future to look like. So you can snap your fingers. It's, gosh, what day is it? It feels like Thursday. Yep. Okay, it's Thursday. That was total. It could have been Wednesday. So it feels like Thursday. It's Thursday. You snap your fingers. A few days passes. You wake up on Monday, and all buildings have changed to the way that you imagine them in the future. What does that look like?
I would say it's, as mentioned, very activity based. So it's not only desks, not only rows of desks, but you have their special areas, lounge areas. You have these kinds of desks where you can quickly sit down and work. Also a lot of like private spaces for calls, because more people are staying at home, and more time is spent on Zoom to connect with people who are working from elsewhere. And I imagine that offices are going to have a more homey feeling than they used to in the past, because people now like working from home, and we have to bring the home to the office as well.
We were talking to Danielle Newton, I believe, from Zendesk last week, and the founder of Zendesk, I think, is from Denmark, if I'm remembering correctly, and they have this term, hygge, if you ever go to Copenhagen, and I love the idea of offices becoming this like feeling of hygge, where it's like more oriented around hospitality, more oriented around like what is the activity that you need to do, as opposed to that is my space, that is my desk, that is the thing that I go to, and my sort of 50 by 50 square feet. Um, do you imagine? I think that like this is fun and conceptually interesting, but the reality is like there are big cultural differences about what the office means depending on where you are in the world. And so I guess I'm curious, in this sort of imagined future of the offices that you can snap your fingers and have, do you think that with Wise will figure out how to bring in the local culture into that particular office, or is it more kind of center out, meaning this is the Wise culture when you come into a Wise office, regardless of where you are?
Really interesting that you ask this, because this is actually exactly something that we have built out. So we have built a design guide for us that states all the standards for Wise offices that would have to be kind of similar in different locations, but there is always a little twist of local culture in each of the offices. So yeah,
Can you give me an
basically what you
example?
said we are doing.
That's awesome. Can you give me an example?
So, for example, in Singapore office that we opened now in January of this year, there are, for example, I don't know how exactly they're called, but those tiger-shaped rocks somewhere on the walls. Also used a lot of like wood and rattan materials and that kind of stuff, and some patterns in meeting rooms and this type of stuff. And for example, in our Tallinn office, which is the biggest office, and we have a lot of different nationalities working here. Each of our meeting rooms have a theme of different country where our offices are located.
That's cool. That's cool. Before we wrap, any other things that you would like to prognosticate on? Like, when are we going back? Is it, I've heard August, I've heard May, I've heard 2022, I've heard I'm never going back. When do you think we're back in kind of, call it, the vast majority of your offices are back in full force?
Well, I suck at fortune telling, but but it depends on very much on how the pandemic evolves. Because last year during summer, for example, 3 months Estonia had 0 cases, and now we are in top 2 infection rate in Europe. So things can change, and it's very hard to predict how they're going to change. Because if you asked me half a year ago, I would have said by July of this year, Tallinn would be back in office, but now I wouldn't say it. So yeah, I don't want to fortune tell.
Okay, great. If these folks want to follow up with you, is the best place LinkedIn or is it email? What's the best way to follow up?
Yep, they can find me on LinkedIn. I am also open to emails. So it's liis.reisner at wise.com. So you can write me.
Great. Liis, thank you so much for spending some time with us. To the folks who attended, thank you so much for being here. And we will see you all next time.
All right. Thank you for having me.
See you.